Hey, Clayton, were there really giants in the land like it says in Numbers 13? I'm cool with miracles and supernatural things in the Bible, but that sounds like a fairy tale. All right, let me tell you the context for this if you haven't read Numbers 13 in a while. This is the story where the people of Israel have been traveling from first Egypt to Mount Sinai, then Mount Sinai to the Promised Land. They finally get to the edge of the Promised Land. God says, I want to send you in. And before they go in, they send in 12 scouts, 12 people, one from each of the tribes of Israel, and they go check out the land. And the scouts come back and give a report. And the report is, this place is awesome. The fruit of the land is incredible. It's a good land. It's totally incredible that God is giving us this. But the people in the land are powerful and terrifying and huge. And 10 of the 12 scouts give a very pessimistic report about whether or not they're going to be able to take on the people who are in the land. Two of the scouts give a very positive report, Joshua and Caleb. Now, they acknowledge that the people in the land look formidable, but they think, God's with us, which means God is bigger than they are. So if we're going to go, we've got the upper hand, so let's not be afraid, let's go. But the other 10 say, no, this is awful, and they spread a bad report. And in part of their report, when they're trying to tell people just how scary it is, this is what they say, okay? And this is kind of where the weird stuff picks up. They say, the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. All the people we saw were of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. So they're describing these gigantic people, and they use some terms here that are very interesting. They talk about the Nephilim, and they talk about the sons of Anak. Now, the Nephilim are first mentioned in the Bible in Genesis chapter 6, and we actually did a Hey Clayton episode about this a while back, and we'll put the link to that in the description. But here's the summary of it, and I can't do all of the explanation here because, there's some odd things, but basically the story is this. There are some heavenly beings, the sons of God, who are angels or some kind of supernatural creatures who come down and they have sex with human women. And the offspring of that union are these mighty warriors, these giants that are called the Nephilim. Now, I know that raises a ton of questions, right? I went through some of the things that people have said about this in that video that I did earlier. But let's just assume that the story straightforwardly is what it is. Angels have sex with women. The offspring of the women are giants, okay? And they're called the Nephilim. So many questions about this, right? And lots of people, I'll just tell you this before I go too far. Lots of people like to speculate about these things. And it is always tempting when there's something weird in the Bible that we don't have a lot of information about to have your imagination go all sorts of places. This was actually common in the ancient world. There is a very influential book in the time of Jesus called the Book of Enoch, which we still have copies of. And it was written in the time of Jesus to try and extrapolate on the things in Genesis to say, this is what the man Enoch saw. He had a vision of heaven, and it tells the whole story about the sons of God and the sons of women, or the daughters of women, men, and the Nephilim and the giants and all the stuff. It's got a lot of different stuff. And there were people in the first century who absolutely thought that this was a reliable description of what was going on. Now, that's an interesting book historically, but it's not going to give you the accurate information about what was going on there. There are also modern books that like to make a lot of this. And I'll tell you, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, there is all sorts of stuff, but it is all pretty awful, okay? Almost all of those things are speculative. They are distractions. They are laden with conspiracy theories. They make connections that should not be made. And they're not usually very scholarly, so they're not even giving you good perspective on what people thought historically. So I would encourage you not to go down those rabbit holes. Oh, and certainly don't try and learn anything from that Noah movie that came out a few years ago. Absolutely not what's going on here. But here's what we know. The scouts in Numbers 13 are saying, we went into the land and we saw the Nephilim. We saw these giants, which are the offspring of angels and women. And that's what we saw. Now, the question is, did they really see that, right? Like, were there really giants in the land? And it seems to me like there are three main ways to interpret this passage. The first is this. It could be that this was the scouts giving kind of an exaggeration, right? Like they're not actually describing literally what they thought they saw. They're using stories and imagery from their culture to hype up how hard it's going to be. It'd be like saying, that team went down like the Titanic, right? Like, it's just a reference to something that's a vivid image. We're not saying anything about them being on a boat, right? It's like that room looked like Godzilla marched through it. Like, we're just trying to exaggerate how big of a mess it is in that room. We're not actually saying, I think a giant radioactive dinosaur marched through this room. And they could be doing that. They could be saying, we went in there and these guys, they were tough. They were intense. They were like the Nephilim, man. They were huge, And it's just a way of kind of vividly telling their story. But on the other hand, it sure seems like, in context, the Israelites believed that there were giants in the land, or they at least thought it was possible, right? Like, this doesn't come across as something where they're saying, well, I know it's mythological, right? Like, you're referring to some, weird thing in the past or some fairy tale or something. Like, they're thinking it might be possible that there are giants in the land. Also, the sons of Anak, the Anakites that they mention, are mentioned later in the Bible. And in fact, the conquest of the land, it's pretty clear that God, part of what he's doing is trying to wipe out this group of people, these kind of giant men. We also do know of several specific giants in the land. You know one of them, I'm sure, Goliath, right? Goliath and his brothers, if you kind of look in 1 Samuel, are described as very, very large. And it is not overtly said that they are descendants of the Nephilim or something like that, but it's implied that, this is kind of a final conquest of these ancient giant enemies. There's also a guy who's mentioned in the book of Numbers, Og, king of Bashan, who is described as a giant. When you look at the measurements of how big he is an excessively large man. So it seems like there are hints that the Israelites and maybe Scripture itself is saying, yeah, we really do think there are giants in the land. Okay, so maybe it was an exaggeration or maybe not. Second way to interpret it is that the Nephilim were killed in Noah's flood, but the angels did this again, right? So in Genesis 6, sons of God have sex with the daughters of men. They have the Nephilim, and the flood wipes all of them out. It seems to be that's the case, but it also seems like the rest of the Bible assumes the Nephilim might be around in these few other places where they pop up. And so maybe what happened is the original Nephilim were wiped out, but the angels did it again, and they had more offspring that were giants, and so on. But it also seems a little weird. Those stories aren't mentioned, and God never does anything about that. So it seems like maybe that's the case, but it's all arguments from silence. The third option is maybe the Nephilim survived the flood. Maybe they did, because here's what Genesis 6 says. Okay, Genesis 6 verse 4 says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, meaning the days before the flood, and also afterward. So there's something even in the book of Genesis that implies that the Nephilim were both before and after the flood. Now, we are not told how would they be both before and after the flood when the flood seemed to wipe everybody out. Well, it could be that the flood didn't wipe everybody out, okay? Now, here's one thing I don't think happened. I don't think they held on to the ark, okay? Again, back to, weird movies about these sorts of things. There were some ancient stories where they said, oh, maybe the Nephilim held onto the bottom of the ark and that's how they survived or something like that. That's all weird speculation. But it is worth acknowledging, and this might be a surprise to some people, that there are multiple views of the interpretation of the flood, of how wide the extent was. There are different ways to read the descriptions there, and some people interpret it in the straightforward way of it being a worldwide flood, but there are clues in the text that it might actually be a regional flood or even a local flood that was being described in these very large terms, but it actually didn't cover every surface on the planet, which means there could have been people outside the extent of that flood who survived in some way, and maybe the Nephilim were included in that. That seems a little funny because it seems like the flood was there to take care of some of the Nephilim, but it is in the realm of possibility depending on how you interpret those passages. But here's the thing. All of those are very, very obscure, strange things that we don't have verses for. And always, 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 when we are reading the Bible, we want to say, focus on the things that are clear and interpret the things that are unclear in light of them, and don't go speculating on the things that are unclear. You want to stick with revelation, not speculation, okay? So we just don't know the backstory of the Nephilim or the giants or how it all works. But I will say this, the world is weirder than we think. Okay. As modern people, actually, we're weirder than we think. Okay. Modern people, we are the strange ones. Over the history of the world and over the scope of the planet today, our culture, Western culture, that largely is skeptical of supernatural things, we are the ones who are out of sync. We are the ones who are the anomaly. It's not everybody else, all of those ancient people and all of people around the globe who are like, well, they weirdly stumbled into strange beliefs that there are supernatural things. The fact that we say, well, of course there's no giants. Of course there's no angels, having sex with women. Of course none of this happens. We're actually the weird ones. Doesn't mean we're wrong. I'm just saying we're odd when we are suspicious of supernatural things like this. Regardless of what the interpretation is, in the context of Numbers chapter 13 and all of the conquest of the land, the bottom line is this. The giants were no match for God. If they were just big dudes, or if they were actually Nephilim, either way, you're not supposed to be scared of them. We should actually be like David, who says, you know what, there's a giant in the land, I'm going to step up and fight him because greater is he who is with me than the one who is with them, right? Like Goliath, the giant, is scary, but he's no match for God. And that's what Caleb and Joshua were saying at the very beginning. Look, it doesn't matter how big the dudes are in this land. They should be afraid of us because God is with us. We shouldn't be afraid of them. And so this is a general posture that you and I are supposed to take. Even today, when you're like, look, I don't really need to know if there's a giant in the land. You face things that you say, look, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can step out on faith and do the thing that God wants me to do because it just seems too hard. How could it possibly work out? How could anything good come out of this? Guess what? God is bigger than that circumstance. He is bigger than the enemy. He is bigger than whatever you're facing. And that situation should be more afraid of God than you should be of that situation.
Thanks for listening. If you've got your own questions, email questions@BibleSavvy.com. Like and subscribe to catch our regular episodes every Monday on the Bible Savvy Podcast.